This is Delhi. Please stand by for our next program. This is All India Radio. In our national program of talks tonight, we bring you our panel discussion entitled Grandparents, the Invisible Parents. The participants are Dr. Jayanti Dutta, well-known clinical psychologist, Dr. Geetanjali Chopra, founder of the NGO Wishes and Blessings, Kritarth Malhotra, founding partner Hum Communities, and Vickram Bahl, media personality, who initiates and moderates the discussion.
Welcome to the National Program of Talks. Today we're going to discuss grandparents, the invisible parents. All human relations are complex. This is no less, but it's one relationship where love is unconditional and it has been growing over the years in different ways. The relationship between grandparents and grandchildren has been changing as times change and society adopts new ways. We're going to look at not just the relationship from today's perspective, but also how it is likely to grow into the future with changing views, and also how the conflict is also a part of this relationship. My panelists today are Dr. Geetanjali Chopra, Kritarth Malhotra, and Dr. Jayanti Dutta, a well-known clinical psychologist. Let me start with a quote from Margaret Mead, who says, "Everyone needs to have access both to grandparents and grandchildren in order to be a full human being." So in fact, do you agree with that, Jayanti?
Yes, I do. Grandparents probably bridge in that kind of an emotional gap, which today's parents are not able to provide or even think of. So what I have seen in my practice, that the children who have an access, they can go back to the grandparents, whether it's paternal side or maternal side, but they just nurture this as a very crucial component in their psychodynamics. In the making of their persona also, they play a major role, and things which they have an access to, they are free about with the grandparents. There are so many do's and don'ts when they interact with their parents. So the relationship between the parents and the children, somewhere it's not the same as it used to be earlier. It has changed because of nuclear family. Both the parents are working, and the demand, both the sides, children as well as the parents, has changed. It is somehow, unfortunately, it's taking almost to a do's and don'ts. The liaison is based on those two parameters, whereas when they go back to the parents, grandparents, it's absolute freedom, as if they get a fresh air to breathe in. They can do whatever they want, and very often this gives them a very strong emotional security, which is indeed needed for a healthy personality development, because today's children are facing more challenges. And this is where they can fall back onto the grandparents, and grandparents have the whole lot of time. Unfortunately, I have not come across any nuclear family till now where the parents are saying, yes, we have the time for the children.
You bring up an interesting point there, Geetanjali, but just to stick with what I put out earlier, do you think it is very important to have and also create the time to experience both the visit to your grandparents and learn from them? And that, I think, is an important role the parents will play in ensuring that the children do visit the grandparents, and also later in life be a grandparent. And do you think, with the way life is going today, very fast living, fewer people having time, as Jayanti just said, that this is changing, and which way is it changing in your view?
Firstly, I absolutely agree with the quote, because I believe I am what I am today, and thanks to my grandparents' intervention, because being with them, I was fortunate enough to have all four of them for a very major part of my life. And my personality, my thinking, my outlook, everything has been shaped, predominantly by them, along with my parents, of course, but the grandparents played a very important role. I'm not a parent, and I do hope that in some point in life, I do become a grandparent, just to pass it on, pay it back, pay it forward. And it is, the nuclear family has its advantages, but I'm still very conventional in my thinking, and I feel that the biggest push towards a joint family is the grandparents, because they actually nurture and shape children and make them what they are.
What do you feel about it?
I strongly feel, and I wholly agree with what Dr. Geetanjali just said, that having grandparents around you while you are growing up, it changes your personality. It kind of molds you into something which I am very proud to say is not a part of my current generation. So I started my first company when I was 22, and the value and the thought process and the mindset which I had throughout my life, I could clearly see that it is something, what similar to what my peer groups were having. So that was one of the biggest emotion or the realization I had while I became a young adult, that the mindset I carry, the values that I carry are not from the current generation, is what I feel. And all thanks, I'm really grateful for that, because it was my 4 grandparents who had nurtured me, raised me for, and had given me exclusive attention for the first 20 years of my life, and I was very lucky.
But when you say that, do you mean that you a little out of sync with the times as well, and probably felt at times that you were, should I say, worldly wise in some ways? What was it?
I wouldn't say philosophical, but yes, I would say worldly wise, because at a very early age, I could actually see what I want in life, where I want to go, and that clarity of mindset, which kind of helped me to stay away from all the distraction usually my generation faces, is a result of that nurturing. My clarity of thought on being focused on what I want to achieve, which was also inspired by my grandparents, is something I am taking forward from them, and I hope someday, as I do wish to pass it on.
If I may just put out another quote, Desmond Tutu, and he says, "You don't choose your family; they are God's gift to you, as you are to them." The one thing that has been changing in recent times is that time, as you just mentioned, Jayanti, has become a big constraint for working parents. And in Indian culture, at least in the past, we have been expecting grandparents to step in and look after their grandchildren, rather, while the parents are working. Do you think this is something that is likely to continue? And do you think the tolerance levels within families would allow this tradition of where you take your grandparents for granted? Okay, they will step in if we need them.
I have my doubts. That's gonna be a real zone of major conflicts in the family life. Why? Because, see, when you talk about the present generation of youngsters, they are likely to face role conflict. What happens is, during your early socialization, you pick up a role model and you have no problems inducting in those components in your persona. But now what is happening, what I'm seeing is that, the grandparents have the patience, they have the onus to pass on the values, the normative pattern of behavioral dictum of the society, and they pass it on in a very palatable way. They don't say, do it, and you have to do it. And unfortunately, the parents don't have the time, don't have that stamina, don't have that mindset also,
But also
that becomes a problem. So the role conflict is going to be a major issue for these youngsters, because they like the grandparents, but they cannot absorb in their dictates or their pattern of behavior, because they're pushed into a system where they have to run the meal the way the parents are running their day-to-day life. And this is where the conflict starts. Did you mark when Kritarth said that, the nurturant component is so dominant in his verbalization, even when he's reflecting back what the grandparents gave.
Yeah.
Now, this is very, very important for your emotional bonding.
Kritarth, the one change that some people are saying has happened is that now grandparents are getting younger in age, and they have their own aspirations, and they don't want to spend a lot of time perhaps with the family, but more traveling and going around. So it's not that they don't want to spend time, but that always on call, always available grandparent is probably not going to be there anymore. Is that how you see it amongst your contemporaries?
I would agree to it, because this is per se one of the reasons why my company has reached where it is, to be honest with you. let me talk about this new generation of grandparents, or how we call them as seniors with teenager spirits. As you correctly said, the mean age is becoming younger. People are retiring early. They are moving into their second innings at a very early point of time as compared to what they were, let's say, 20 years back. So that change of mindset, that extra disposable income at hand, that extra time at hand, has actually led them to be more aware. And thanks to the opportunity I got to run the company and focus on this particular agenda, how do you create opportunities, instances which can engage these new generation of grandparents? And as you correctly said, they don't want to sit at home, open the daily news and spend the day in front of the TVs anymore. No, they want to explore what is it that they can do in their second innings, be it finding new jobs, finding new gigs, finding even new partners in their second inning. And these new set of, what should I say, opportunities for entrepreneurs like me are enabling me and my peers to create companies, to create solutions which can cater to this newer generation of grandparents. And I think it's a very exciting point of time, specifically in India. While India is the youngest nation, but it's also the fastest growing nation. In the next 5 years, the generation of grandparents which is upcoming, it's the most richest, the most self-aware generation which has yet the country is yet to be seen.
See, I would like to add on with what he said. There is a positive aspect into it, because the youngsters are also looking to the parents, the grandparents, that they are becoming the healthy providers, for opportunities which the parents probably can't afford. Now here are the seniors, the grandparents who are willing to give you. So I think this is a very positive kind of a thing we are having in the society, with the rich grandparents, who are willing to shed off their hard-earned money and the capital with their grandchildren. Very many of them, don't have to really worry for going for higher studies, because you can always fall back on the grandparents.
Geetanjali, if you may just add to this, I wanted your view on it. That do you think this changing trend, while it has many positives, as Jayanti just mentioned, that grandparents will probably chip in even for education of grandchildren, do you think there may be a little bit of a clash there? Because when you think of grandparents, you have this very old traditional way of looking at a couple who's now retired, who's going to now just shower love on you and probably give you a cookie or some barfi. And now you have this younger, more trend-setting grandparent who's willing to fly off on a world tour, who's looking to take up another job. And just as Kritarth said just now, probably is looking for a new partner also. So this would be quite a different view to what the traditional view of a grandparent has.
Yeah, I think that there can't really be one model fit all sort of a model here, because each grandparent, like each individual, is different. While at one hand we all know that technological advances have internet and so much to do has made life so much more complex in a lot of ways, but I think being a grandparent itself is such a big achievement that somehow your instincts go back, and the love and the nourishment and the care and the affection comes automatically. So I have a young nephew, and my parents just turned grandparents, and both of them are working individuals, but I see the kind of joy they get when my little nephew comes to them, right? So I don't really think that all the negativities on one side, a grandparent will be a grandparent. And in my opinion, very many times what happens is, if you've experienced it as a grandchild, you would give it back as a grandparent. So I think that give and take relationship, because what kind of an impact, like if I take my own example, I know what my grandparents did for me, and if and when I get a chance to be a grandparent, I would go all 4, in fact maybe even 5 or 6, because I know the kind of difference it would make to a child's life.
Well, you see, you have raised an interesting point there, but there's also the area of conflict, and that's something I want to dwell upon, because
yes, I could agree to that, because I see that a lot with friends and family. What happens now is that a grandmother traditionally was a grandmother with a big bun and like you said, sitting on a couch and just filtering out love. In today's day and age, grandmothers seem to be having more knowledge than mothers, which obviously was the case, but now the grandparents or the grandmothers are no longer silent spectators. They have a voice of their own, experience of their own, and they're all internet friendly. So very many times the clash comes between parents and grandparents as to how to nurture the child, because the child is somebody's son or daughter, but also somebody's.
That's not a new story.
But it's
a very
become,
old
I feel, a
one.
little more rampant now, because
But
the older generation
there
has
is a
more access.
component of mental health into this.
Yeah, I'm going to bring you in there after I read us a quote.
Yeah, please.
So, when we talk of conflict, Spanish proverb that says children brought up by grandparents are generally spoilt. And there's a second one. This is by Claudette Colbert. It says, why do grandparents and grandchildren get along so well? They have the same enemy, the mother. So, while it's in humor, probably said in lighter vein, but yes, the mother is in charge in the house for discipline and for bringing up the child. And grandparents and grandchildren seem to get along very well because they can bend the rules. I mean, the grandparent doesn't have to be as harsh in enforcing discipline. So do you think this sort of a situation can be resolved as a clinical psychologist?
It should be. I don't deny that the mother is the disciplining component in the whole socialization process. But unfortunately, today's mother is not able to, in spite of wanting, she's not able to give those kind of nurturant, time-bound services to the child. You see, they are working, so they have time constraint. And all this, to say that the reared by grandparents means they'll be spoiled. I don't agree there, because today's grandparents are mostly elite ones.
I have another quote, in fact, to second what you say, and it's by an unknown person, but it says, I am not spoiled. I'm just well looked after.
Very true. And here I just raised an issue of mental health component. You have the whole lot of senility, senile psychosis, and all those problems of old age. You can keep them at bay if you are able to share your positive emotions with a growing youngsters. You can't indulge in with their kind of activity, with their psychomotor agility. But when you witness that, you recollect that, well, this is what my grandparents did to me. Like we heard both of them. So I'm sure when they become grandparents, they would be able to share their positivity with the grandchildren. Unless you are able to share these kind of positive emotions, you have all these bottled up within you, and they give rise to a whole lot of, psychotic problems.
So that's an interesting point you make. Let me get Geetanjali into this. Sometimes it spills over and you have a conflict at home. But a grandparent can sometimes play a very important role as a mediator, where there's a conflict between siblings or conflict between parent and child, and then they become like the mediators.
Yes,
have you thought about that?
Absolutely, mediators, you confide in them. They become, like I always say, my grandmother, my maternal grandmother is my best friend, and if my mother wanted to find out something about me, she would ask my grandmother. So that is not, you're the biggest confidant, the best friend. And also, if you feel, and this is very interesting because my mom at one point used to always say, I'm a generation closer to my daughter than my mother is. So how come she's more friendly to the grandmother than to me? So I think that is the power of being a grandparent and having that relationship with your grandchild.
Kritarth, any experience that you've had in this area?
I have 23 years full of experience.
Oh, so there you are.
Of hiding behind my grandparents, getting things my way. And as the quote correctly said, I'm well looked after. Being the only grandkid for a huge 2 decades of my life was, point one is that a grandparent can actually teach you what love is. How do you love someone? How do you take care of someone? Those things which when I felt on my own and they were inculcated in me, that created a change of view of the world for me. And the second point was, how do you make sure that there are boundaries? I really liked this point about both my grandfathers, that they had that unconventional love. They had very good atmosphere when I was there, but they always made sure that I learned what boundaries are. And that has been one of the key learnings that I took from all of them, that while you love, you need to know how to set boundaries.
Very interesting. If I may just bring in another quote by Fred Rogers. And he says, grandparents can be very special resources. Just being close to them reassures a child without words about change and continuity, about what went before and what will come after. That's a very important part, continuity. And Geetanjali, you've in fact worked with people. Share with us, what is it that your experience has been when it comes to continuity between or across generations?
I think that's the most beautiful part of any relationship, continuity. So we have 2 old age homes, and what I've noticed is that more than being upset and angry about being ill-treated by their children, most of these elderlies are heartbroken by the fact that their grandchildren ill-treated them. So, they always have this vision that our parents, our grandparents brought us up in a particular way, and they wanted to pass that love on. And when they see, there's a break to that continuity, there's that break to that love, to that respect. And when grandchildren ill-treat grandparents, there's nothing more disheartening. And I see it almost every day in the kind of work I do. And we try to, kind of fill up this void by introducing more children to these neglected elderlies. And what we see in the whole process is really heartwarming. So, love is such a unique emotion, and grandparent love is so unique that these elderly, abandoned, heartbroken elderlies actually start putting that love into these children who are not even known to them.
What drove you to this work? Because I believe you were doing other work in the past, and then you decided to give everything up and go into this social
Yes, so
service.
I'm actually a trained academic, and I am a PhD. And after working and establishing myself as an academic, I decided to give it all up at the age of 35.
Why? Was it somebody that influenced
Yes,
you?
and the person who's been, who was the instrument behind this change, the catalyst, is my late grandfather, my Dadaji. And I think I was all of 8 or 9 when I went to this school for visually impaired children, and I was cutting a cake, very happy. And this young girl, she tucked onto my pant and she said, "Didi, mera birthday kab hota hai?" I don't remember my exact reaction because I was way too young, but I think it got reinforced because we used to go there every year. That question stayed with me. It kind of haunted me that we are so used to birthdays, presents, parties, relatives, gifts. And here's a child who doesn't even know when her birthday is. And unfortunately, I lost my grandfather in 2012. 2 years after he passed away, I went back to that school. It took me a lot of courage to go there. But on his birthday, I decided to go back to that school. And I did something totally out of character, because that is something he used to do, which was ask the children, "मैं आपके लिए कुछ कर सकता हूँ?" So I asked these children, naughty lot of 100 of them, visually impaired. I said, "मैं आपके लिए कुछ कर सकती हूँ?" And to my utter horror, I must admit, this little bunch of kids came up and they said, "हमें होली खेलनी है." And I was like, what? Because these are visually impaired children, 95 to 100% they can't see. And I, for one, hated Holi. So, I said, okay, let me see what I can do. And I went back. So it
And
was
that's
him
what-
who took me back to the
Right.
school. And that's how Wishes and Blessings started.
Kritarth, how about you? How was you influenced into hum communities?
So one of the biggest reason of where I am and where I will be is my grandma, my nani. She was the one who had nurtured me a great part of my life, and she introduced me to another young chap who was then 77. We had the equal amount of energy, just a half a century of age difference between us, but the way we synced up and the way my nani had introduced me, and she had given me this vision that, Kritarth, you saw what it's like to have time, to have energy, and no place to channelize it. And that one statement is still, how should I say, boiling up my blood every day to wake up and create, to work towards creating a solution for anyone in India and maybe someday outside the world when they enter their second inning. My vision is to give them something to look after. If I see at my paternal side, my grandfather, who passed away on his birthday last year after hitting a good century, till his deathbed, an hour away just from his deathbed, I saw him being motivated towards written meditation. For the 27 years of my life which I was with him, every day, every point of time, the word perseverance is something I learned from him.
Right.
The level of devotion and he had towards his written meditation, kind of enabled me that if he can do it so devotedly, why can't I create an opportunity similar to this as I grow up in my career?
Jayanti, at this stage, I'm going to bring you in not as a specialist, not as a psychologist,
All right.
but on a more personal note.
Okay.
What has your experience been with your grandparents, and what is the one thing that really struck you through life and carried you through life as being life-changing, and how do you see it?
I am born and brought up in Delhi. Unfortunately, I don't have much of this thing about my own biological grandparents. But throughout my whole childhood, there was a family who were my neighbors, and the gentleman there, he was a very elderly, very affectionate person. And every time I will come back from the school, he would say, okay, have you got your results? Show me your results. And he will needle me, why less here, why more there? And I used to be petrified. I said, my God, why he does that? And then as I grew up, he would tell me, you are a very bright child, you can do this, you can do that. And he will convey this thing to my father also. So both of them will join hands. And he was much senior to my father, my biological father. And he had a great influence on me. And he was a businessman, but he would leave everything. Suppose I went into his house at an odd time, he would immediately leave everything and will ask, "Aaj kya hua? Kaise aaye?" And that thing always had in my mind that I have to do something little bigger to go back and tell him that this is what I do. And when I asked how I become a psychologist is when I asked somebody, what is psychology? When I came across this word from somewhere, nobody could really explain to me where this mind is and how it works. He was the one who said mind is something you have to study about. Only then you will be able to understand the dynamism behind. So, if when you asked me, I think this is the first time in my life where I'm narrating this experience of mine. So this is a brilliant opportunity to see. You have two more participants. You see how creativity can be induced by this kind of a positive bonding between the grandparents and the children. So the whole synergy of running two NGOs or running your two companies, the resource person are basically the grandparents. So it's a very positive kind of a powerful synergy bank we have in our society. We must really be focused on it. But unfortunately, as Geetanjali also narrated, there are certain unfortunate instances. I think this is where we come into the, as a specialist to bring about the changes. We definitely, if the family wants and takes the intervention, professional intervention at the right time, you can change the scenario.
But if I may just ask you from your experience, Jayanti, where do you see it going today? Do you find more happy grandparents or unhappy grandparents than, let's say, 30 years ago?
Well, I'm sorry to say it's the other way around, more unhappy grandparents.
And the reason behind it, in your view?
The reason is the breaking of the family bonds, that nurturant relationship is going haywire. We are so driven by the immediate gratification of our needs. We are forgetting about the pro-social aspect of our relationship. Succurrence, nurturance does not exist in our relationship anymore. Anybody comes to your house, immediately you feel, well, what can I get from this relationship? This is the most unfortunate scenario we are facing today in our professional practice also. The relations are breaking up because of this commercial angle. What am I getting out of this relationship? What will he be giving me? And then only you decide how much you have to give out. Relationships, you can't be nurturing with these kind of parameters and these kind of things happening within your mental setup. See, these children, when they were children, they never thought that what grandparents are doing for me. Now, when they were capable, they reflected back, this is what my grandparents, that's the essential bonding of human relationship.
Well, I'm going to quote one more quotation, and it says, "The best parents get promoted to grandparents." Said by somebody unknown. But interesting thought. Let me, of course, thank you all and leave you with one small final quotation. And I'll tell you why I'm doing so many quotations today. It's in fact, in a way, thanking my grandfather who used to read to me and quote various interesting quotes and try and put them in perspective for me. So we've all been influenced in some way or the other. And I leave you with this thought. It says, "Grandparents are like stars. You don't always see them, but you know they are there." So thank you all so much. Thank you, Kira. Thank you, Geetanjali. Thank you, Jayanti.
Thank you.
And thank you for bringing so many different perspectives to this discussion. And thank you for tuning in. Until next time, goodbye.
In our national program of talks tonight, you were listening to a panel discussion entitled Grandparents, the Invisible Parents. The participants were Dr. Jayanti Dutta, well-known clinical psychologist, Dr. Geetanjali Chopra, founder of the NGO Wishes and Blessings, Kritarth Malhotra, founding partner Hum Communities, and Vickram Bahl, media personality, who initiated and moderated the discussion. Produced and presented by Naveen K. Gupta of All India Radio Delhi, this program came to you from the Delhi station of All India Radio.